History often tells us that great men and women leave behind legacies carved in stone, written in books, or remembered in monuments. But the truest legacy isn't just in words or statues, it flows in blood. While some lineages vanished into obscurity, others endured for centuries, carrying the names, power, and influence of the world's most famous figures. Imagine if the story of Caesar didn't end with his assassination, or if the echoes of Genghis Khan still shaped politics. Today, from royal dynasties that continue to reign, to revolutionary families that keep reshaping nations, these bloodlines prove that history doesn't just live in the past, it breathes through descendants who walk among us. This is the story of survival, legacy, and families who refuse to disappear. When most people think of Julius Caesar, they picture the mighty Roman general, cut down by betrayal on the Ides of March. His story feels finaler, man of unmatched ambition, whose blood stained the Senate floor, ending not just his life, but his line. Yet history rarely stops so neatly. Caesar's direct lineage may have been severed, but his wider family, the Uli, continued to shape the empire and Europe long after his death. The true torchbearer of his bloodline was Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir. Through him, the Julian name fused with the Claudian dynasty, birthing a line of emperors who ruled for nearly a century. Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero all carried the legacy of the Uli, even when corruption and cruelty tainted their reputations. Their blood connected them back to Caesar, reminding Rome that his shadow had not vanished. But the influence of Caesar's family didn't end with the empire. Roman aristocrats intermarried across Europe, scattering fragments of his bloodline into medieval royal houses. Centuries later, genealogists traced connections between Roman families and European nobility, proof that Caesar's lineage had quietly slipped into the bloodstream of kings, queens, and dukes. His story was not just marble statues and military conquests, but children, marriages, and dynasties that endured. The irony is that Caesar himself hungered for immortality through power and monuments. Instead, his family ensured his survival, in a quieter, more permanent way, through blood. The Julian name, once nearly erased by daggers, became immortal by binding itself into the DNA of Europe's future rulers. The Caesars remind us of an essential truth about famous figures there. Stories don't end with their deaths. Their families carry the burden of memory, the weight of expectation, and the unbroken chain of survival. Rome's emperors may have fallen, but the blood of Caesar, in fragments and whispers, never disappeared. In the deserts of Arabia, a man named Muhammad forever changed the course of history. He was not a king draped in jewels or a general commanding legions, but a prophet whose words would unite tribes and spark a civilization stretching across continents. Yet alongside his spiritual message came something deeply human, a family line that endured through centuries of struggle, reverence, and survival. The Prophet Muhammad left no surviving sons, but through his daughter Fatima and her husband Ali, a bloodline was born, the Al-Albayt, or people of the house. Their sons, Hassan and Hussein, became the anchors of this lineage, carrying forward both the Prophet's memory and his blood. For many Muslims, this family was more than kin, were living symbols of faith, justice, and continuity. But history rarely offers peace to such legacies. Hussein's martyrdom at Karbala in 680 CE seared his name and his descendants into the heart of Islamic identity. From that moment on, the Prophet's family became not just a bloodline, but a banner. Across centuries, Sayyids and Sharifs, claiming descent from Muhammad, spread across the Middle East, North Africa, Persia, and even into India. They carried prestige, often serving as scholars, spiritual leaders, and sometimes rulers. In many regions, their presence was seen as a blessing, a living link to the Prophet himself. Dynasties rose on the foundation of this lineage: the Fatimid, Caliphate in Egypt traced its claim through Fatimid. Sharifian dynasties ruled Mecca for over 1,000 years. Even today, the Hashemite royal family of Jordan points directly to this sacred ancestry, unlike Caesar's bloodline, which slipped quietly into aristocratic veins. Muhammad's descendants carried a visible and celebrated identity, often marked by titles, respect, and responsibility. What is striking is not simply their survival, but their resilience. Across wars, invasions, and political upheavals, this family endured. They adapted, moved across continents, and preserved their identity even when empires crumbled around them. The Prophet may have left the world 14 centuries ago, but through his descendants, his presence remained tangible, walking in flesh and blood among his followers. The story of the Prophet's family is more than genealogy. It is a testament to how faith, memory, and blood can bind together to defy time. While dynasties fall and monuments fade, the descendants of Muhammad remain living heirs to one of the most powerful legacies in history. In the windswept steppes of Mongolia, a child was born into hardship, abandoned by allies, and raised in the wilderness. That child became Genghis Khan, the conqueror who carved the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. His armies reshaped continents, but his most enduring legacy was not the empire, it was his bloodline. Unlike Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, whose direct lines faded quickly, Genghis Khan ensured his family's survival by weaving it into the very structure of his empire. His sons and grandsons became Khans, ruling vast regions from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Kublai Khan, his grandson, founded China's Yuan dynasty, ruling over millions and leaving a cultural imprint still visible today. Others ruled Persia, Central Asia, and Russia, each extending the reach of Mongol influence while anchoring the Khan's bloodline in diverse lands. But the survival of Genghis Khan's descendants was not just political, it was biological. Historical records and modern genetic studies suggest that his lineage spread across generations at a scale unmatched in human history. Through conquest, diplomacy, and marriage, the Khan's family multiplied, embedding itself into local populations. Geneticists estimate that as many as 16 million men alive today may carry a Y chromosome traceable to him. In essence, his dynasty did not just endure, it exploded. This endurance was not without challenges. The empire itself fragmented within a century, consumed by rivalries, wars, and external pressures. Yet even as political power slipped, the family name carried weight. Mongol rulers in Persia became patrons of Islamic culture. Descendants in Central Asia merged into Turkic dynasties. Even in Europe, echoes of Mongol blood touched royal courts through intermarriage. The family adapted to new religions, cultures, and languages, surviving where the empire did not. What sets Genghis Khan's lineage apart is the scale of its impact. While other famous families maintained influence within borders, his descendants rewrote the demographics of entire regions. His survival story is not just one of noble dynasties, but of ordinary families who unknowingly carried his blood into the modern age. The Khan dreamed of eternal conquest, but his truest victory was far quieter, not carved in monuments or thrones, but in the veins of millions, proof that his family, more than his empire, never disappeared. When we think of kings and queens, many imagine a bygone era, gilded thrones, divine crowns, and empires that once spanned the globe. Yet, in today's world, where revolutions toppled monarchies and democracy became the dominant ideal, royal families still walk among us. Their survival, against centuries of upheaval, is one of history's most remarkable feats of endurance. The most visible example is Britain's royal family, the House of Windsor. Though the monarchy has lost much of its political authority, it remains a global symbol. From Queen Victoria's sprawling descendants, nicknamed the Grandmother of Europe, to King Charles III today, this bloodline has weathered world wars, abdications, scandals, and shifting public opinion. The Windsor family endures not by clinging to absolute power, but by reinventing itself as a cultural institution, living proof that royal blood still holds sway in the modern age. Beyond Britain, other dynasties also survived the storms of history. The Bourbons of France, once overthrown in the French Revolution, returned to power multiple times and still reign today in Spain and Luxembourg. The Habsburgs, who once ruled half of Europe, lost their empire after World War I, yet the family continues to thrive as aristocrats, scholars, and politicians across the continent. Even in the Middle East, royal families like the Al Sauds of Saudi Arabia and the Hashemites of Jordan trace their bloodlines back centuries, maintaining real political power in a world where most monarchies became relics. Their survival is no accident. Unlike fleeting dynasties, these families adapted to changing times. They forged alliances through marriage, preserved wealth across generations, and carefully curated public images to remain relevant. While revolutions toppled many thrones, a few families found ways to endure, balancing tradition with reinvention. What is most striking is the paradox they embody. On one hand, they are symbols of continuity, living connections to medieval kings and queens. On the other, they have become modern celebrities, their lives broadcast on television, their weddings watched by millions. The Crown. Not all famous families shaped history with swords, crowns, or empires. Some left their mark through creativity, passing down genius like an heirloom from one generation to the next. These artistic dynasties remind us that talent, too, can become a legacy that survives the test of time. Take the Bach family of Germany. Long before Johann Sebastian Bach became a towering figure of classical music, the Baches were already known as a family of musicians. For nearly 200 years, they produced organists, composers, and performers who filled churches and courts with music. Johann Sebastian elevated the family's reputation to its peak, but his sons Karl, Philipp Emanuel, Wilhelm Friedmann, and Johann Christian carried the torch, each leaving their own mark on the history of music. For generations, the Bach name was synonymous with artistry. The same pattern appears across the centuries. Think of the Bruegel family of painters in the Netherlands, whose vivid, detailed works defined the Renaissance and inspired generations of artists. Peter Bruegel, the elder sons and grandsons, kept his vision alive, turning the family name into a school of painting that influenced Europe for decades. Even in literature, the family line sometimes echoed with creativity. While William Shakespeare left no surviving direct descendants, his contemporaries and later eras show how artistry often runs in families. The Wordsworths, for example, were bound together by poetic spirit. Dorothy Wordsworth's journals and writings, though less celebrated than her brother William's, deeply influenced the Romantic movement. Beyond Europe, artistic dynasties flourished in other cultures as well. In India, the Tagore family became a powerhouse of creativity. Rabindranath Tagore, Nobel Prize-winning poet, came from a family steeped in literature, music, and reform. His relatives were writers, painters, and thinkers who shaped Bengal's cultural renaissance. What unites these families is not just skill, but survival. While political dynasties often crumble when power shifts, artistic families endure by passing down culture, knowledge, and training. Their legacy is not one of armies or wealth, but of melodies, colors, and words, immortal threads of creativity that continue to inspire. The artistic legacies prove that some families never disappeared, because their gifts could not be silenced. As long as art survives, so too do the names of those who made it a family inheritance. Revolutions often promise a break from the past, a clean slate where new voices replace old powers. Yet some revolutionaries left behind not only ideals but families who continued their work, transforming personal sacrifice into dynastic influence. These families remind us that even in the age of democracy, bloodlines can shape nations. Consider India's Gandhi Nehru family. Mahatma Gandhi, though he lived simply and rejected worldly power, inspired a movement that freed a nation. His spiritual heir, Jawaharlal Nehru, became independent India's first prime minister. Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, rose to power as India's first female prime minister, and her son, Rajiv Gandhi, later took the same office. Even today, the family remains a central force in Indian politics, showing how revolutionary ideals can harden into dynastic tradition. Across the ocean, the Kennedy family in the United States became a symbol of modern political royalty. Joseph Kennedy Sr. dreamed of power for his sons. And though tragedy struck John F. Kennedy assassinated as president, Robert Kennedy gunned down during his own campaign, the family's influence endured. Senators, congressmen, and activists from the Kennedy line have continued to shape American politics for decades. For many, Camelot was not just a presidency, but a vision of family legacy. Latin America offers similar stories. The Perón family in Argentina, beginning with Juan and Eva Evita, Perón shaped politics long after their time. In Pakistan, the Bhutto family carried both charisma and tragedy, with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and his daughter Benazir becoming prime ministers before both met violent ends. Their descendants still carry the weight of leadership. These families reveal a paradox of revolutions. While they begin by rejecting hereditary power, they often produce their own dynasties. Perhaps it is because charisma, sacrifice, and vision are remembered not just in monuments, but in family names. People rally to the descendants of revolutionaries, seeing them as living links to ideals once fought for. What sets these dynasties apart is not just their survival, but their transformation, of rebellion into continuity. Where monarchs pass crowns, these families pass causes. Their bloodlines became banners, their surnames symbols, and their survival proof that sometimes, even revolutions cannot escape the pull of family. Not every famous family stayed in the spotlight. Some slipped quietly into obscurity, their names no longer shouted in courts or etched on monuments. Yet, even in silence, they endured hidden branches of bloodlines, rediscovered centuries later. These are the families that history almost forgot, but never erased. Consider the descendants of the Byzantine emperors. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the empire collapsed, and many assumed the royal bloodline vanished. In truth, members of the Palaiologos dynasty fled into Europe. Some settled in Italy and merged into noble families. Others lived as commoners. Centuries later, historians and genealogists traced their lineages, uncovering a quiet survival of one of history's most prestigious dynasties, in France. After the guillotine ended the reign of Louis XVI, it seemed the Bourbon line had been extinguished. Yet distant relatives survived exile and political storms, eventually returning to thrones in Spain and Luxembourg. What looked like an ending was, in reality, a pause. Even more surprising are rediscoveries made through modern science. DNA testing has connected living people to figures they never imagined. In Mongolia, entire communities claim descent from Genghis Khan, claimed backed by genetics. In Europe, the remains of Richard III, unearthed beneath a parking lot in 2012, were matched with distant relatives still alive today. Families once thought dissolved are suddenly proven present, their survival whispered through chromosomes. Some families deliberately lived in the shadows. Descendants of prophets, revolutionaries, or dethroned monarchs often hid their identities to escape persecution. In Spain, conversos Jewish families forced to convert during the Inquisitions secretly preserved their traditions and bloodlines for centuries, resurfacing only generations later. Their endurance was not celebrated, but quiet, protective, and resilient. These forgotten yet present families remind us that survival is not always loud. Some dynasties live on balconies and palaces. Others live in farmhouses, city apartments, or even in anonymity. The thread of lineage doesn't vanish, just because history stops paying attention. In truth, bloodlines have a way of outlasting memory. The names may fade, but the families remain waiting to be rediscovered, proving once again that fame may die, but family rarely does. We often imagine dynasties as relics of the past kings, conquerors, prophets, and artists whose families once mattered, but no longer shape our world. Yet in the 21st century, bloodlines still carry weight. The families of famous figures continue to influence politics, culture, and even economics, proving that lineage remains a form of power. Consider the royal families who endure today. The House of Windsor, the Bourbons, the Hashemites, and the Al Sauds are not just symbolic reminders of history, they are active players in global affairs. Kings, queens, and princes still sign treaties, influence economies, and command armies. Even where monarchs lack political authority, their presence draws international attention, reminding us that bloodlines can still anchor national identity. Political dynasties thrive as well. The Bushes, Kennedys, and Clintons in the United States show how surnames become brands, capable of winning votes across generations. In India, the Gandhi-Nehru family still exerts influence. In Pakistan, the Bhuttos remain politically relevant. In the Philippines, the Marcos name, once disgraced, returned to power with the election of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. These examples reveal that democracy, for all its ideals, is not free from dynastic gravity. Wealth, too, has become dynastic power. Families like the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and Waltons carry fortunes built generations ago, shaping industries and global finance. Their influence is quieter than that of monarchs or presidents, but perhaps more enduring. In today's interconnected economy, a powerful family name can open doors in boardrooms, just as it once opened palace gates. Even in entertainment and culture, legacies persist. Hollywood dynasties, the Fondas, Coppolas, Smiths prove that fame often runs in families. Audiences respond not just to talent, but to the allure of heritage, a sense that greatness can be inherited. What is striking about the modern age is that bloodlines survive not only through tradition, but through reinvention. Families adapt, rebrand, and find new arenas of influence. They may trade crowns for cameras, palaces for parliaments, or thrones for corporate empires. But the essence remains. Lineage still matters. The survival of these families into the 21st century is a reminder that history is never fully behind us. The names we read in textbooks still appear on ballots, in boardrooms, and on magazine covers. Bloodlines may shift shape, but they remain powerful currents flowing beneath the surface of our modern world.